story like the back of my hand, 'cause I've heard it all before. You always say that you're the one that's in demand, and I don't know the score.
Well, death and taxes are the only certainty. Well, 20% of people of society. Yes, I have made it on my own in this world. Well, not to take care of time around a 2-year-old. I'm gonna start the old nation and do my own thing, and I will be king. I'm gonna start the old nation with the self-preservation. I'm gonna start the old nation with the self-preservation. Well, let me talk a bit about the weather. You must admit it's not very clever. Don't get me wrong, it's not an anti-British song. Well, there is nowhere I would rather be wrong. I'm gonna start my own nation and do my own thing, and I will be king. I'm gonna start my own nation with the self-preservation. I'm gonna start my own nation with the self-preservation. There are just a few things that I would like to say about the UK and how I think it has gone astray. Don't get me wrong, it ain't all bad. I love the crazy fads, like England always buggering up, but you know we're gonna win the World Cup. I'm gonna start my own nation with the self-preservation. I'm gonna start my own nation with the self-preservation.
Keep the red flag flying here.
And welcome, pop pickers, to the 90th edition of Political Unmuted. Just as a little thing, everybody was discussing, because we take it in turns to have a week off. The team takes it in turns to have a week off. And they were discussing, and sort of Paul's got a poly thumb. And no skin on his hip, and everybody's saying, "Oh, Paul, oh dearie, oh Paul." So Paul's having a week off this week, but just round the corner on Laura, there's Paul. still overseeing all the tech side of things. He can't get away. God bless him. Anyway, hi. Maybe Paul will be able to get away at some time. Welcome to the rest of the team. Hi, Laura.
Hello.
You're down as Paul, by the way. Hi, Stuart.
Hello.
God bless you, Stuart, Mr. Wonderful Wisdom. And Jane, hiya.
Hello.
Jane is quite
For being amazing this week.
the nicest person you ever met. And just before we set up, I am so depressed this week. I am so angry, but I am just in despair. It's like that song by Peter Gabriel, Lord, here comes the flood. Has it just not all erupted at the same time? Burning the grouse moors, we're pulling out of the Human Rights Act, the European one. We've just passed a law to allow us to break our international agreements. The Ukraine is going awful. Labour's announced that it's going to try and to change Brexit. I mean, it's just awful news. So thank goodness that we have all these three wonderful people to explain to us what's going on. And welcome to you on all joining me on our comments page. Please make your comments and I'll try and pick them up. But as normal, let's start with and a round of applause for Laura for pressing the right button. Well done. Getting excited there. Let's start with Laura. Moment of the week for you, Laura.
Well, I now think I might have to change it to successfully pressing buttons. But my moment of the week has to be the fact that our good colleague, friend, comrade Samantha Townsend got longlisted for her bid to be the parliamentary candidate for her hometown of Bishop Auckland. She absolutely deserves it. She's unbelievable. She works too hard. And I think there was the longlisting kind of is always that step that sort of terrifies everybody because it's kind of out of your hands. Somebody else decides your fate. Thankfully, the powers that be decided what we all already know, that Samantha's amazing and she should definitely be on the long list. So congratulations, Samantha. All the best with the rest of the selection process. It's going to be long. It'll be quick, but I'm sure it'll feel long. I think it's only the whole thing's a 5-week process. So yeah, just all the best to Samantha. And well done, the people of Bishop Auckland, for having somebody like Samantha. Make sure you get voting for her because she's just awesome.
Thank you. I always like it when listeners post their moment of the week. Neil Terry's moment of the week was going to the Big Red Picnic at the UK's last Clarion House. Explain, Neil. What's a Clarion House? Why is it important? What's last about it? Anyway, I'm glad you had a nice time. Congratulations to Sam as well. Stuart, moment of the week.
Mine hasn't taken place yet, but as a member of Unite and particularly Unite Community, tomorrow I'll get the chance to meet my General Secretary, Sharon Graham, which is a big deal. She's been winning, doing some winning, hasn't she? And supporting the workers, and it's going to be an absolute pleasure to speak to her about Unite Community and what we do and what the future is for us and our branches.
Sorry, Stuart, but it's a great honour for Ms. Graham to meet you, not the other way around. The answer to Mark and Jacqueline is both yes. If Sam becomes the candidate, she'll be up against Henna Davidson, and that is the reason why she dropped off Political Unmuted to secure her political future and hopefully become an MP. That would just be lovely. Paul Daly has posted his moment of the week. You just can't get rid of him, can you, really? Mine is learning, he says, I probably won't need an operation on his thumb. Well, that is great news, and having a week off. Finally, Jane, moment of your week.
So this is really cheeky, and I didn't ask you in advance, but can I have two? Because there's two really big things. If I'm quick.
Whatever you want.
Paul
Jane.
does it. Just take it
The answer is
away.
always yes, Jane.
Thank you. So I saw a few days ago in Disability News Service, John Pring put out an article. Some academics from universities of Liverpool, Kent and Oxford released a study that linked 600 suicides in the 3 years, I think from 2010 to 2013, to the work capability assessments. They were caused by the work capability assessments, what people were put through. 600 people, I think it was 592, killed themselves. And I'm sorry, I should have said there's a trigger warning there. I'm so sorry. But so that's 600 lives, 600 families and their friends destroyed. I can't even begin to imagine the time, the desperation, the horrors those people went through, and how many more people have been pushed nearly to the brink. The DUP have done nothing about it, and they can't tell us whether the rate's gone down now because they haven't actually bothered to collect the relevant data to be able to tell, and they've not enabled researchers to be able to access the data to access it. And really, really angry about that. But then today,
Hang on, Jane, 2 seconds before you go.
Okay.
First of all, getting the words is so difficult, and either these are the wrong words. I apologise to everybody, but young male suicide is a major issue, and a sign of our broken Britain, a sign of our uncaring Britain. Secondly, Jane, people are having difficulty hearing you. Can you adjust your microphone so perhaps it's a bit close to your mouth? Jacqueline Hemming's moment of the week was the terrible news about Crispin Flint's. I'm not quite sure that Crispin regards it as terrible news, but if he's running a show tomorrow lunchtime, he's having a party to mark his expulsion from the Labour Party. And sort of, you may want to, I may be wrong, you may be devastated, but you'll be able to find all about it then. What was your second moment of the week, Jane?
So today I realised that from today, the Gypsy Romney traveller community, their way of life is illegal in this country now because of the legislation that went through today. So
again, Jane, what's illegal?
Their way of life, because of the legislation that came into play today. I think it was Mickey Walsh, and we knew this was coming with the, the legislation the Tories have put through. But today's the day. People can just have their homes and possessions confiscated. They're not allowed to live the way that they're living in this country. So, and that was just too big. They were both too big not to say. So I had to say them both.
Oh yes, these things are absolutely vital, and so often these things are missed. Thank you so much. So you're with me. It's an awful week in Tory-run Britain. They have to go. Whether or not putting Labour in will make it any better, I don't know. But the Tories have got to go. Anyway, now what I'm going to do, I'm crank up to the next section. I give Laura the time to get her finger on the button. And we...
Now it's time for the big story.
Brilliant, Laura. Very good. Mick Hills reminds us that there are things to uplift our spirits. Thank you, Mick. God bless you. And I think we're just about to talk about that now. The big story, of course, is the rail strike and whether we felt it was a success or a failure. So it's the same question really to all three members of the team. Let's start with Jane. Success or failure?
Well, I hope it's going to be a success. It seems like to me like it's been successful so far because it's galvanised a lot of public support despite an incredibly hostile media and establishment, which is quite something, I think.
I mean, do you feel that Mick Hills mentions Mick Lynch? I mean, do you think that Mick Lynch won the PR battle?
I did. I think it was, I don't know if people saw Matt Green put out a comedy video of an interview, and I thought this was some silly parody. And then I saw the real interview with Kay Burley, and it genuinely was nearly word for word. It was ridiculous. She just kept on, trying to put words into his mouth. You know, he kept on trying to insinuate that the strike was violent, and he kept on turning around at the most peaceful group of people you could imagine, going, "This is it," you know. And then she started to talk about the miners, and you know, is it going to be like the miners' strike? And I thought, I don't know. Are you saying the RMT are going to be the victims of police brutality? I don't think that was what she was saying. But, you know, it was embarrassing. It was really embarrassing. And he was amazing to keep his cool and be so dignified.
I mean, there's a lot of humour on social media, and the Dead Ringers had a sketch of Grant Shapps cowering in fear under the desk because Mick Lynch was in the studio. And there's a wonderful joke. Why will they never name a street after Mick Lynch? Because no one will ever dare cross it.
Nice.
Just wonderful. There's various claims being made for it, Jane, that it's the death of the great conservative experiment, that it's the death of the privatization god. I mean, do you see it as being so significant, is the jury out on these things, or is it just about the rail strikers situation?
It's the biggest, I think, industrial action in 30 years, is it? And it's 40,000 people involved. What they're planning to do, what they're fighting against, you know, it will cost lives if they're not successful. Cutting back on 34% of essential maintenance, 2,500 maintenance jobs on the railway, that can only lead to accidents. You know, unstaffed stations, letting go of the station staff, control room staff. I don't remember the last time I caught a train and thought there's far too many staff around here. I mean, you're lucky if you can see anyone, the way they've already petered down the numbers. And then when you hear that the rolling stock companies paid out dividends of £1 billion in 2020 to 21, which is the equivalent of half of all ticket sales, or nearly a quarter of the government assistance that the industry gets, and that for some reason they've decided to go for the workers who are facing, you know, spiraling utility bills, rent costs, and cost of food, after having no pay rise for several years. And all they're asking is to not lose their jobs entirely and to actually be allowed to afford to live.
Thank you. Have you noticed, listener, that Jane tends to do this? That you think, oh, she's finished talking, and you ask her one question, and suddenly, wham, in she comes. That was a brilliant answer, Jane. Thank you so very much indeed. Laura, success or failure, do you think? Are you along with Jane, or are you more measured?
Am I more measured? Honestly, I think it's been a massive success in that it has highlighted a lot to the British public. I noticed that Leanne's posted in the chat that we have to be careful about making it about one man, and I would absolutely agree. However, I think Mick Lynch's approach and his just the realism that he brings with everything he says, and he's not trying to play political games, and he's just being honest about workers, is exactly the kind of refreshing attitude we need to be bringing to the media. And I just think it's surprising that he was allowed to be set loose on the media. And actually this week was the first time in a long time that I've ever dared to watch Question Time, because I got it made me physically sick to watch it in the end. It was just how loaded the questions were, how organised the audience were to be pro-Tory and anti literally anybody else. And it was much the same this week as well, you know, with the people who saw it will know about the lady who talked about trade unions being dinosaurs. The whole thing was farcical. And, I was furious and I wanted to scream at the telly, and Mick Lynch just took it all in his stride and was like, okay, well, and he just laid everything out perfectly reasonably, perfectly understandably. You couldn't have argued against what he was saying. And I think that sort of approach is something that the British public do need to see and rarely get to see. And also, you know, seeing as I'm sitting in Paul's chair, I will tell you the thing that he always says when we talk about trade unions. A union isn't this sort of mythical thing, this organisation, you know, that dictates to people. A trade union literally is just people who work in a place. And the RMT have gone on strike not because the RMT have told their members that they're going on strike, but actually the members have gone, right, we've had enough. We are going to go on strike collectively. And they've all done it together. And I think they're absolutely right to do so. So in that respect, yes, absolutely, this has been a success. Will it impact or affect any decisions that the Tories make? That remains to be seen.
I mean, I agree with you that it's just lovely to hear somebody telling the truth about what they feel and sort of answering the questions and laying it on the line. And my golly, don't our politicians need to stop just telling us this superficial wish-wash and expecting us to sit there and take it and believe it. And which brings me to the Labour politicians. Do you think the Labour front benchers who joined the pickets should apologise?
I mean, as a devout trade unionist, and that is, you know, I'm very heavily involved in politics, and you know, I've been campaigning for the Labour Party for a long time. The Labour Party was founded within trade unionism, and you know, there's people who would roll their eyes and tell me to not say that, but actually, no, we should be out on pickets. If a government is taking away the rights of working people and making terms and conditions worse, and actually not just that in terms of the RMT, making ordinary people who get on transport, making their journeys less safe, then of course we should be absolutely fighting that. And I don't see the problem with I've been out on a couple of pickets this week, albeit I'm not on a front bench. I think that is a decision for individuals to make, but I am wholeheartedly behind the trade union movement and will always stand on in solidarity with people on picket lines.
Now, what David Lammy says is he said the Labour Party will never support strikes, won't support strikes, because the Labour Party supports negotiation.
Right, okay, so the problem with that is I didn't hear the full conversation, so I don't know if what I'm going to say is in direct contrast to that. But what I would say is, yeah, every trade union is in. All we want to do is negotiate. We want to sit down around a table, talk, try and find a solution. What people need to realise is, and what I think people don't get, is that strike action is actually the last resort when everything else is exhausted and we don't have another option. The only option we have is to withdraw our labour, and that's all we've got. And nobody takes that lightly. Nobody makes that decision easily. It is something that once you've exhausted the options, once you've had those conversations and nothing is working, that's when strike action happens. And there's a lot of boxes that need to be ticked, and there is a mass movement behind that need to agree that that is the next course of action. It is not just the boss of RMT or Unite or CWU or the barristers or anybody else who's out on strike, you know. It's not just them going, right, we're going to strike. It is the members who decide that, and it is a lot of members who need to decide that, and it is when they've reached a point where they feel they have got nothing else to offer, they've got nothing else that they can bring to the table, and they're not being given anything that they've been asking for, that they at this point feel to be very reasonable, because trade unions don't ask for things that they don't feel they deserve.
Thank you very much. I mean, I agree, and I've pointed out before that the Tories have no qualms about producing policies that appeal directly to their core membership. The Labour Party, for some reason, feels that what it needs to do is to go seeking a mythical centre ground and absolutely spit in the face of its core membership, who are the workers. If the Labour Party does not support the workers, what use is the Labour Party? And you might want to answer that on the comments. Some lovely comments here. Timothy Beaton is off. Somehow he didn't expect a channel on socialist think tank to be talking left-wing ideas. He's cleared off. Lots of praise for Mick Lynch. He's the leader that Labour is lacking. Sarah Sultana said the same as I've just said, so she must be right. Yes, Neil Terry agrees with you, Paul, Laura. The majority of the public are aware of the very high thresholds for industrial action. Stuart, success or failure?
Every time, a person, a worker stands up for their rights, pay and conditions, that's a victory in itself, and every chance that, you get to communicate what's important to you and why you're doing it, that's a victory again. So I think it's been a huge success, because this is not just national news because it's such a uncomfortable situation for the country to be in, but because so many people are telling quite personal stories about how, their life has been affected by a very broken system.
I realise I'm being the Eeyore in the party, but the government is pressing on with its plan to introduce agency workers to defeat any strike. Network Rail is pressing on with a plan to lay off up to 1,800 workers immediately. What's your response to the fact that the strike has gone ahead and the world is just pressing on to piss on the rail workers, just as they always intended to do? What's your reaction to that idea, Stuart?
Well, if you don't fight, you always lose, don't you? So this is the fight. This is the battle. They could have accepted, those members could have accepted those awful conditions, the loss of jobs, very life-changing situations for many of them. They could have accepted that, and that wouldn't have been the worst thing for the government, would it? They would have loved that. But the really hard thing to do is actually fight against this and think about themselves, their families, their futures, our safety on the rail network. And they've taken that on board, and it's a very difficult choice to do that and then go out and, picket to make sure that the message gets out there. But, I think it's also important, while we have figures like Mick Lynch, who is, a superstar, but he's not extraordinary. This is the normal, calling out the lies is, run of the mill in the trade union movement. This is standard practice. All those members will call a spade, and they will stand up and fight. He is just the exemplar of their behaviour, of their high quality, of the type of people they are. So I think we need to, communicate that broader, that, he's just a normal chap, a normal fella. And the reason people are liking him is because you would like all those people standing on the picket line, and you would get behind them when you hear their stories.
I think it highlights the poor quality of MP that we're lumbered with at the moment in both parties. One final question for Jane before I go. Thank you, Stuart. Do you think this is the start of a summer of strikes? Has this just kicked off a summer of discontent, do you think?
The discontent was coming anyway. The CWU are balloting, aren't they? Barristers are on strike. There's a lot of strike action. I think the teachers' unions are also looking at strike action. None of them are doing that because the RMT have gone on strike. They haven't seen that and thought that looks like a good idea. Across the board, this government's just failing on its economic policy, and so many people are breaking that they're being pushed to the limit where they've got no choice but to do this in order to survive, try to get a living wage.
And notice that the climate of the barristers are out. How sympathetic are you to the barristers wanting a higher wage?
I'm really, really sympathetic after I read up on it at the weekend. I saw a journalist, I think it might have been Catherine Bexey, speaking on Twitter, and I was really shocked to learn that often, certainly in the first years of their employment, they're working on less than minimum wage. So you might see a fee that they'll get paid £100 for going to a hearing, but they might need to do 10 to 12 hours preparation work ahead of that hearing if they want to do a decent job for the client. So when you work that out, that's less than minimum wage. They've got to pay their travel costs out of that. They've actually got to pay chambers rent off of that as well, and clerk fees. And because of the big delays in the system, with cases taking sometimes years to get to their end, it was already bad because of the cuts before the pandemic. Now it's much worse. They won't get paid until the end of that process anyway. So not only are they getting paid less than minimum wage and paying out expenses in real time, they might wait a year or years to even get paid that less than minimum wage money. So I think the Bar Council did a survey and came to the conclusion that the average wage in the first 2 years of employment in the last few years was less than £13,000 a year, and it's very difficult to live on that amount of money in this country now. So I'm very sympathetic.
And we're just about to find out how important it is that we have a judicial system which is fit for purpose. And sort of that'll happen now, because in a little moment, when Laura's sort of pressed the button that I'm going to ask her to press in a short while, we're going to move on to our other story. Just quietly, don't tell anybody, but am I doing all right telegraphing all these things to you, to Laura? People just think it's all seamless. Next question. Roe versus Wade has been overturned. What does the Supreme Court verdict mean? What's going on? What's the meaning? I've got a quote here for you, Laura. A dramatic rollback of women's rights in one of the world's richest countries, which prides itself on its protection of individual liberties. Fair summary? What do you think of Roe versus Wade being overturned?
100% fair summary. It's if you know the history of this one, it is not a surprise at all. It is devastating. It's heartbreaking for the people of America and actually the world, because we've seen historically things that happen in America do tend to roll themselves out across the world. For people who aren't sure, a really, really potted history, because there's a lot to unpick here. But Roe versus Wade was a court case back in the 1970s. A woman called Norma McCorvey fell pregnant in 1969 and didn't, at the time, I won't go into the reasons why, felt she couldn't have the baby. So there was a court case launched and they called her Jane Roe. Wade was the Texas senator at the time who was in charge of upholding the laws, and basically Norma McCorvey had argued that the laws were unconstitutional. That meant she couldn't have an abortion, but it was unconstitutional because of her privacy and many other things. They did end up eventually, years later, winning that case, by which time she had already had the baby and given it up for adoption. But they did win and said, yeah, it was unconstitutional. But however, since then, we've had sort of every decade at least a couple of big marches, big arguments against the rights of abortion. So in the 1970s, there was a big March for Life, which got a lot of attention, people who were very anti-abortion. In 76, there was a ruling brought in that an American government couldn't spend money on any sort of abortion or help in that way unless it was as a result of rape, incest, or a threat to life. In 1989, they introduced a husband notification requirement. So if you did want to have an abortion and you were married, you had to inform your husband. He had to give consent. There was in 1989 there were many different sort of caveats to the rule. There were so many. It just seems like over the decades there have been many things put in place, barriers to be put in place to women's right to choose, and they've been trying to strip that away ever since Roe versus Wade. So yeah, even recently, in Texas, we've seen this has been coming for a long time. 2003, President Bush introduced a partial death abortion. Was the only way to do it. You weren't allowed to have an abortion past a certain age.
So what is the effect of the overturning of the verdict of the Supreme Court? What's it going to be, the practical effect on women's lives?
Well, so essentially, this has set us back. All of those arguments, all those marches, all those fights we've had, all the legislation we have had changed. I say we, I mean the American people, has now been reversed, and women, their right to choose, their right to have an abortion when they feel they want to or need to, it has been taken away. Essentially, it is up to somebody else. Which is what they've been getting at for a long time, as evidenced by what I've just said. And it has been coming for a long time, and it is really upsetting. One thing I will say that, and honestly, like, I'm not an orator on all of this. I don't know every single thing, but I was surprised today when I found out that actually in the UK, most women don't realise that abortion is actually not a right here either. There's just a law that gives exemption from prosecution if you have an abortion. So we're not a million miles off having this happen to us as well. And it's just, it's really upsetting because we're going back decades again. We're going backwards with rights. Me saying all this is not. I'm not.
People making comments here. Ruth Davison, it's an absolute fucking disgrace. Well, I agree with you, Ruth, and there you go. But there's other things. All it's going to do, says Leanne Powell, is force people into backstreet dangerous abortions. Suicides will rise. More babies will be abandoned. I've spent all week between anger and despair on this. I mean. Mortality is expected to rise 20% amongst the population in general and 33% in the black population.
Yeah, so, absolutely. And 100% will. And that won't come as a shock to anybody who has any sense whatsoever. We're going to force victims of rape. We're going to force very young girls. We're going to force people who are going babies that are not going to be able to survive outside of the womb to have these children, to carry them through to birth. The mental health impacts of that are going to be massive, and they will affect people for years and families for years to come. And and I've seen this said so many times in so many different ways, either whether it is in political debate or even in comedy shows. But for me, it's the absolute truth. The people who are fighting so hard for pro-life and to save these fetuses and to bring them in the world, their care for those babies stop the minute they're born, because there are no decent childcare programs. There's no free childcare. There's no help for new mums, single mothers, poverty wages. People just stop caring. So once the baby's born, we might have pro-life, but we don't have pro-living at all. And they're just forgotten about. So it's just yet another way for men to control women's bodies.
I've been really impressed by these things which are coming on social media saying that if we're going to abolish the right to have an abortion, then what we need is a law which says that if you're the father of a child, you need to support that child.
Yes.
And you need to pay for it. You need to acknowledge it. Is that Rosa or?
That's Rosa with one of her toys, and I've got Penny here. I don't know where Paul is, but he's not looking after the dogs. They're running about.
I'm going to come back to you, Laura. Stuart, I mean, one of the things is that people have been suggesting is that this has done amazing damage to the social and political structure of the United States, a mockery of democracy. The Supreme Court has lost legitimacy, says Elizabeth Warren. It's damaged Christianity and the Bible. I've never seen so many people coming out and attacking Christianity and the Bible. I mean, do you think that it's damaged America, this, or do you think this is something which the right will just pick up and run with, and they don't see it as damage at all?
The right wing generally quite enjoys self-inflicted damage, whether it's with international opinion about what they're doing, law breaking, law changes, how they treat their people, and they feel quite comfortable because they are generally, as a political group, and inward looking rather than outward looking. They're obsessed with themselves more than they are with the people around them. So that certainly lends itself to what's going on. Certainly, people in America must have lost so much faith in their justice system. If what is globally considered to be a fairly fundamental right, that's it's being taken away from you, and it's going back to a position where it mirrors states that we don't think of as the people that we would want to be friends with. States where where people have an aspiration to go to America, don't they, and live a wonderful life. But in fact, leaving lots of these countries and going to America is a regression on your rights. It's such a sad thing. It's not this American dream anymore. It's actually, the American nightmare. And certainly people in America must be feeling that right now.
I mean, lots of them, certainly. I mean, these states and enacting laws which make abortion illegal at 6 weeks, one at conception. And in cases of rape and domestic abuse. And you just think, and it's 800 miles from New Orleans to the nearest abortion clinic, 800 miles. And you can't offer, and they're not offering to take you, people are offering to take you there, but they didn't say to have an abortion because just to talk about it is illegal now. They're having to say if you want to go camping. And what kind of a country is that? Horrific. Yes, And finally, Jane, I've got here that same-sex couples are worried. I've got one woman, Mary Miller, said to a Trump rally, it was a victory for white life. And it's all getting tied up with the great replacement theory that all these, I use the word in inverted commas, as they would call them, all these foreigners, are replacing white people. I mean, in the meantime, California is saying that they're going to put a thing to the contrary into their constitution of their state. Are we moving towards a civil war? I mean, are we and there's one or two people said the same thing. This is just the beginning. There's dangers. They're going to go further than this. It won't stop at reproductive rights, says Leanne Powell. I mean, are we going down a rabbit hole of real trouble here, Jane?
I think the Supreme Court Justice, I think who wrote the opinion that started off this, I think also wrote a second concurring opinion about banning birth control, banning gay marriage, and banning sex outside of marriage. So that's why people are already talking about that. And I think I can well imagine those things happening at this stage. So I think there probably will be civil unrest, but this could also be the start of a movement to fix things properly in America, because this is a country without any, state funded, without an NHS. So that needs fixing, without, like you say, any support for childcare. And I was reading an article in the Jacobin, and it just made me feel a little bit hopeful that actually this might kick off a really big movement to fix this situation properly, to bring in proper reproductive rights, but also I think the sentence was the right to have children in a safe and healthy environment, as well as the right to not have children. And so I hope that's what will happen, but I have no doubt there will be some civil unrest in the meantime.
I mean, the point is, Jane, isn't it, that it's what the point that Laura made earlier. Somebody said they hate the term pro-life. So do I. That anti-abortion, foul bigots would be another term I would appreciate. But the thing is that I've lost my track. I've just been so rude. I've just lost track of what I was going to say. What was the last thing you said there, Jane?
The right to have children in a safe and healthy environment, as well as the right to not have children. So I think there will be a movement for that, but some civil unrest in the meantime.
Absolutely, and thank you for that. I've got one last question for you, Laura. State-sanctioned forced birth, that's what we're talking about. Is this The Handmaid's Tale coming true?
Oh my God, John, you took the words out of my mouth. Honestly, if you haven't watched The Handmaid's Tale, please do. It is shocking. And the thing I found most shocking is how not unbelievable it is. I kind of feel like, yeah, this could happen. This really legitimately could happen. And the thing, and what people have been saying in the chat tonight is absolutely right. This, reduction in women's rights is a gateway to other things. It's not going to stop here. It is a power play. We've got a capitalist patriarchy at play here. They do not want power taken away from them, and having power over women's bodies has been an easy win for centuries. And so we'll start here and we'll move on from that, and we will take over everything until none of us have any rights.
I note Sonia Soda in The Guardian, the danger of relying on judicial activism to deliver and maintain social change. And the changing their mind, aren't they? It needs putting as a right. Somebody pointed out it was a privilege because they took it away. It shouldn't. It should be a right. Thank you so much, everybody. Last question. We had the sign of 2 Tory defeats. One of them a walloping defeat in Tiverton and to the Lib Dems, I might point out, not to Labour. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to read out some headlines of various articles, and I'm going to ask you for your comments till we run out of time. I'm just going to go round and round and round. Stuart, I'll start with you. Jonathan Friedland, it is a verdict on a cruel and useless government that's running out of road.
Accurate. Yeah, I think certainly voters have made their voices very heard, certainly in one of those by-elections. It will go down in the record books as quite a defeat for the Tories.
Thank you. Jane, Andrew Rawnsley, Boris Johnson is a sorcerer who has run out of spells.
Oh, I hope so, but the man seems like Teflon. He just doesn't care. He's got no shame, has he?
Well, it says he's not going to change, doesn't it? Okay, Laura, yours. For Starmer, keeping Johnson in Downing Street is a gift.
Oh, come on, John. Give me the easy ones, why don't you? Is it really? I don't know. Keeping Boris Johnson in government is not a gift for anyone except possibly the billionaires who benefit from his tenure.
I think the argument, though, isn't it, Laura, that he's so awful that he's an easy target to score points off.
Yeah, possibly. I don't know. I think the focus always needs to be on how bad this Tory government is, and I think criticising Keir Starmer, criticising the Labour Party, criticising the movement, all of that is a distraction from just how awful they are. Getting Boris Johnson out would be a gift for all of us.
Thank you very much indeed. God bless you. Stuart, I'm glad you came back because it's your turn now. A harsh lesson for the Tories, you can't outrun tactical voting. Peter Kellner.
I don't think tactical voting exists anymore in the way that people think that it did in the 2000s. And what we have is a volatile electorate who are incredibly well informed because their technology allows it.
Thank you very much indeed. That's very interesting. Talk to me about that a bit more. I mean, so because the received wisdom of this election is that tactical voting is the way to go. As the next question will emphasize.
You know, tactical voting used to be when the Lib Dems put that little bit on the bit of their leaflet. Only the Lib Dems can win here. But now, because politics is so, you know, broadly broadcast to people over the internet, you know, social media, there's so many ways to access it. The people can, you know, be zoning in on very specific items. And that's one of the reasons I think that lots of, you know, smaller independent type parties have popped up who are able to, you know, tune in on certain things. And because we have an electorate who are, you know, very well informed, certainly more so than, you know, historically, they can they will likely find somebody who will try and fit their voting need, which is what I think happens when you see by-elections. Like any electioneering is, you know, you there's a little bit of chasing after the vote, isn't there? But more so, at a time now where everything is so hyper-focused, you could drum down into a community and present a policy idea very focused on a small group of people. And that, you know, it is pulling away from traditional tactical voting and changing how we see tactical voting now.
I mean, just a little bit further, Stuart, on this. I mean, my CLP has just passed a motion and to send to conference as a constitutional motion for conference, suggesting that the Labour Party in constituencies where the members feel they have no chance of winning, that they might be released not to run a candidate. Because running a Labour candidate will strip votes away from the party that might have a chance to beat the Tories. So what you're saying is that no longer really applies as an issue.
I don't believe that it does apply. I think that because people, you know, they have that connection, people will, you know, likely have a tradition of voting. And if they want somebody out, they will, you know, likely place their vote with their preferred party or an alternative. But because there's so many more alternatives now, that's kind of dissolved away a bit. Honestly, from my perspective, is that the Labour Party needs to run a candidate in every seat. I don't see there being a progressive alliance, you know, that fits our electoral system at the moment. And any show that we would make concessions to get into power against the government like Boris Johnson's, which is, you know, disaster to disaster, scandal, one of the worst governments we've ever seen, is an admission that you don't think that your offer is of value to get rid of that, you know, government that's in sitting. The offer has to be really powerful. It has to, you know, hone in on what people want. It has to offer people opportunity in the future that they need. It has to be an alternative to what's in. And when you make these smaller concessions, you're not actually allowing people tactical voting. You're weakening their actual interest in going out and voting in the first place.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And picking up what Stuart's just been talking about, and Leanne as well, I think. Jane, John Harris, the Tories are teetering, but only a progressive alliance can deal the final blow. We've heard Stuart's thoughts on a progressive alliance. What are your thoughts on a progressive alliance?
So I found the results of these both by-elections actually quite terrifying when you look into them, because the results were good, but when you look at what's happened, in 2017 and 2019 in Wakefield, there was 66 and 64% turnout. That's gone right down to 39% in this by-election. So it's, the Tory votes plummeted, and that's great. There were 15 candidates on that ballot right across the political spectrum. There were independents, there was the Northern Independence Party, there was the BNP, there was a whole spectrum. And, I'm glad people didn't go out and vote for the BNP. I think they got 311 votes, which is scary enough. But what really scares me is that people just don't seem to be voting at all. In Tiverton as well, the vote shares, the turnout's gone down in those two previous elections from 72% to 52%. That's a lot of people who just think there's no point. I don't know what impact voter ID has had on that. I shouldn't have thought it's all of it. That won't have helped. But this voter apathy in the face of a government who's making decisions which are killing people, willfully causing death, poverty, misery to people's lives, I find that very frightening indeed. So I'm not really sure what a progressive alliance can do because if people aren't going out and voting for the Northern Independence Party or these other smaller parties who are offering hope, and they're not voting for Labour, there's another problem. We need to get to the root of. We need to find out how to engage with people who just have given up on politics.
I think Jacqueline Hemmings is agreeing with what you're saying. Not sure I'd call UK Labour and the Lib Dems progressive. So basically you stand with Stuart that what matters is not the alliance. What matters is the manifesto.
Yes, we need to give people hope, real proper hope.
Laura?
Yeah, I do understand what everybody's saying, and I've sort of been teetering on the edge of despair in terms of politics at the minute. But then when I stop and think about it, the Labour Party have been the only real opposition for a long time, and I know a lot of people think that is not the case anymore. But then I think about the people I know who are in the Labour Party and who are speaking, like we said earlier on, like the RMT, like the Mick Lynches of the world, who are just talking honest truth. And you've got people like Stuart, and you've got people like Paul, and you've got people like Samantha Townsend. If we can get people like that elected into positions, and those are the people who are speaking on behalf of us, then surely that will present a better option for us. Because the Labour Party is a machine.
I'm going to now give you your final thing. Keir Starmer. Labour has now claimed the centre ground and has shown that it can win.
Well, I think...
Got 3 minutes, Laura.
3 minutes, okay. I think Labour can win. I think Labour have got some of the best MPs, local MPs, who really do care. They've got some of the most amazing activists that I've ever met. And, this show wouldn't have been possible if it wasn't for the people I met in Sedgefield, who were all Labour Party through and through and were absolutely fantastic. Those roots are still there. They haven't gone anywhere. They're still there because we're all still fighting. The centre ground, I hate that terminology. I hate the centre and the left and the right. It's really starting to bother me because I think the centre ground hasn't been the centre ground since Tony Blair. I think Tony Blair moved the centre ground so far right that the centre ground now is not what it resembled. We've never moved. Socialists have never moved. We're exactly where we've always been. We just are now considered radical left, but we're not. And actually the terminology and the media portraying us as they do, as we've seen many times, I've been called in the media, in national media as well, a Momentum thug, even though I wasn't a member of Momentum at the time. And there's just that narrative, but actually the people are what matter. The members, the people who are out on the street, the people who are door knocking, the people who just give their blood, sweat and tears regardless are the people that matter. And I know so many of those people here in my region who just are trying their best just to make things better, because honestly, can things really get, on touch wood, can things really get much worse under this Tory government? And those people are or have been part of the Labour movement. And so, yes, we can win, but I sort of try and get away from this whole centre ground terminology if I can.
On that note of hope, well done, Laura. Thank you so very much, because I've just been in despair this week. Some lovely comments. Leanne Powell, socialist think tank is the only reason she stood in the Labour Party. Neil Terry, Labour are only trading on anger against Tories at the moment. They need to offer something and better. I think we all agreed on that. That's been a point that's made. Mia Mantri, people like yourselves play a big part. She stood in the reason she stood in the party. Jacqueline Hemmings agrees about good MPs. Jake Ratcliffe can't cope with the thought of being in a progressive alliance with the Lib Dems when they're in coalition with the Tories, and sort of, I think that would be my problem with Jake. I love John Gray. None of the main parties have acquitted themselves at all. Well, we were abandoned. And I think that's the nub of it all, Jan. And we look for somebody to stand up and say, these are policies which will change Britain for the better. And then there'll be huge numbers of people who feel they can get behind those policies. And that's what we want. I can't pass over to Paul. Paul, I need to say goodbye. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say goodbye now. God bless you. Thank you for listening. It's so important to us that you come and support us. And it's so welcome, and thank you so very much indeed. And thank you to my wonderful team who have been spectacular tonight again. Stuart, God bless you, mate. Jane, God bless you.
Thank you for having me.
And Laura, pressing the buttons as well as sharing your ideas. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
You can support socialist think tanks in loads and loads of ways, not least with money. There's stuff you can buy. This is on a whole load of platforms. It will be available as a podcast in the days to come. And oh golly, please come back next week, and we'll have another great show with wonderful ideas. And thank you. And Laura. And we'll say goodbye. Goodbye, everybody.